I was there when I needed someone who wasn't getting over you. When I move to the side, when I move, call you mine, and I know what you're feeling. I'ma take you for a ride, let me take it off your mind, cause you know it's a season. And I move, and I move, and I move when I ride, and I move, and I move, and I move when I ride, and I move, and I move, and I move when I ride, and I move, and I move when I, yeah.
Just get on doing it! Do what everybody else has to do! Do your work!
You know, this lack of quality! You know, this crap! You know, this will not be tolerated!
Nobody else think about getting a grip on it, man! Nobody knew responsibility! No clean the bathroom this morning, man! Yeah, you should remember!
It used to be that we had bad kids who were locked away in reform schools and sick kids who were locked away in mental hospitals. But in the past decade, we've been seeking an alternative. Instead of simply punishing unacceptable behavior, we've been looking for ways to change that behavior. This facility, called Elan, claims to be able to do that.
Hey y'all, welcome and welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to dive into the 80s cult that used a school as a cover-up for over a decade. First, want to start this video off by saying thank you so much for clicking on this video. If you could please smash that like button on your way in, subscribe to the vibe. This is going to be a good one. Trigger warning. We will be talking about child abuse, deaths, and all sorts of traumatizing things today. If that's too much for you to handle, I will respectfully ask you to exit out the video and join us on the next one. I lastly wanted to state that this video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Without further ado, the Elan School cult. Upon searching on Reddit, I came across former members and their life-altering stories. Here's one of them. The title reads, "Even skimming this post once will blow your mind. Most probably think it's made up, but you will be dead wrong." This place only exists because so many believe that it doesn't or that it can't. I believe that the internet is our #1 tool for exposing their horrid blind spots for what they are. Help me, Reddit. I was sent to this place called the Elan School in 1998, and I was only 16. The scary thing is that Elan is still open. Kids aged 13 to 20 are there now. Normal kids, many who may have smoked a joint or two, or who swore at their parents. Of course, there were also real criminals there, but they did not make up the majority. The school, quote unquote, accepted anyone and then held them as long as they possibly could, depending on the age of the child. If you were sent at 14, which many were, you may have been looking at 3 to 4 years. This is because the Elan School collects $50,000 per child a year.
What they do is what I call a wallet biopsy. Do you have enough money to afford it? Then yes, your problem is severe enough. That's it.
By 2011, the annual tuition for 1 year stay at Elan, over $54,000. That's far more expensive than even the most expensive university education. Do you still think it's worth it?
Yes, indeed.
Either from the child's state, school, or the parents. And of course, money was the only motivation of the staff and directors. And of course, money was the only motivation of the staff and directors. These were the people in charge of the progress, quote unquote, in the program. I could write for hours about it. Instead, I asked you to skim through the following bullets and to understand that I am telling the truth. We were forced to participate in staffed, organized fights, none of which were fair. All were designed to humiliate one child, who would be put up against at least 3 others. So even the children who followed the rules, quote unquote, were forced to fight in the name of good, quote unquote. Children who tried to rebel or be free thinking were thrown into an isolation room where they had to stay for months at a time. They had to sleep at night on a dirty mattress on the floor of the isolation room. The mattress was brought to them at midnight and they were woken up around 7 a.m., which means no sleep at all. We were all forced to perform in a ritual called general meeting, quote unquote, where the entire house, 60 or more boys and girls, screamed at one child who stood behind a broomstick.
Y'all ain't your responsibility. Y'all clean the bathroom this morning, man.
You need to be forced to. You need to give them a seminar. You need to put them in the street, lay back in the cut, and accept everything that goes around here.
In the jargon of Elan, this is a haircut. The theory is that blowing the most trivial incidents out of proportion with angry shouting will lead the supposed offender to take a closer look at himself.
Make sure things get done.
So I suggest for the next time, just to put my quality on.
You know, and if you stand there and you react at all, like roll your eyes or yeah, right, whatever.
Many times they were forcibly held up by 2 other students so that they would be able to accept the punishment, or that they would have to accept the punishment. Education was considered a right, but those of us who earned the right were still robbed of an education. School was from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. No homework, no tests, no projects, etc. Math class consisted of grabbing a math book and handing the teacher at least 1 page of work. The other 12 hours of the day consisted of constant conditioning and brainwashing. In the beginning, you would obviously reject it, and then you will be dealt with, quote unquote. You would not be able to rise through the ranks of the program to earn more rights until you could prove yourself to be a good candidate for more brainwashing. Eventually, it became your responsibility to begin indoctrinating the newer residents. Basically you, 6 months earlier. You had strength and non-strength. Non-strengths were not allowed to talk, interact, or communicate in any way with the with the other non-strengths. It took a minimum of 6 months to earn the title of strength. It took some kids years to earn strength, quote unquote. Some kids never did. Elan made money based on the amount of time it took for your graduate to graduate the program. You had to have a minimum of 7 promotions before you were a candidate for graduation, quote unquote. Each promotion took a minimum of 3 months, and 90% of the students never made it past the 5th promotion. These kids had to wait until they turned 18 and could legally sign themselves out. Other kids stayed past their 18th birthday, which is a true testament to the effectiveness of the brainwashing. I remember one dude was 23. Your level of high school had no reflection whatsoever on your ability to leave Elan. I was forced to do my senior year of high school twice, even though I was technically done after the first senior year. The staff members were primarily former students who were hired by Elan after graduating from the program. Many arrived in BMWs and clearly made 6-figure incomes. None of them had degrees in psychology, education, social work, etc. Many of them never went to college at all. All outgoing letters to parents were screened. Many of us having to write many different drafts until they were accepted. All phone calls to our parents were monitored. We were allowed about 15 minutes a week, and the person who monitored the call would have their hand hovering over the phone, as if to hang up as a constant reminder of their reality. We were not allowed to write or receive letters until we were earned the right. This could take 8 months or more. When someone found out where I was and wrote me, my unopened letters were ripped up in front of me as a motivation to move up in the program. I feel like I am beginning to write too much, and I do not want to overwhelm anyone who made it this far. Because most of the bullet points honestly require further explanation to give the full impact of the Elan School and how treacherous it really was. The most important thing that anyone can do is to be aware of this place and make sure that nobody you know ever goes or ever gets sent there for any reason. If you are a parent, then do not send your child there. If you know someone who is there now, then beg the parents to do more research.
The amount of suicides and tragic deaths of former Elan students is reason enough to take this code seriously.
According to Wikipedia, the Elan School was a private, coeducational, and controversial residential behavior modification program and therapeutic boarding school in Poland County, Maine. It was a full member of the National Association of Therapeutic Schools and Programs, also known as NATSAP. The facility was closed down on April 1st, 2011 due to reports of abuse, many from former students, dating back to its opening in 1970. Elan was located on a 33-acre campus that was formerly a hunting lodge. There were also other campuses, such as the one on 424 Maple Crest Road in Parsonsfield, Maine, which was formerly a hotel and hospital before it was bought by the Elan in 1975. The campus was known to have some of the worst abuse in school's history and has been said to have been put out of use sometime in the 1980s. The school acquired some notoriety during the 1990s and early 2000s when former classmates of Michael Skakel, who had attended Elan in the 1970s, testified against him in the trial for an unsolved murder that had occurred about 2 years before he enrolled at Elan. The school was also the subject of persistent allegations of abuse in their behavioral modification program. The history of Elan. Elan School was founded in the 1970s by psychiatrist Gerald Davidson, investor David Goldberg, and Joseph Rickey, a former heroin addict who had worked with young people in drug treatment facilities. Rickey headed the school until his death in 2001, when his widow Sharon Terry took over. Maine politician Bill Diamond served as the director of governmental relations. In the school's program, described as controversial, quote-unquote, humiliation was identified as a therapeutic tool, as was following up on such intervention with encouragement and warm support. In 2002, a New Jersey educational consultant who had referred students to Elan for 22 years had told the New York Times that he would refer only for the most serious cases to the school, which he would take kids who had responded to their program who were really out of control, quote unquote. The school's treatment methods were based on the TC, or therapeutic community, popularized in the 1960s as facilities such as Sydenham and later at Daytop Village. In 2002, a New Jersey educational consultant told the New York Times that the school was certainly not for the faint-hearted. He said that there's lots of confrontation, but added, and yet there are a lot of hugs. Accounts of former students includes mentions of physical and mental abuse, including degrading tasks such as sessions of cleaning urinals with a toothbrush that can last for hours, and up to the point of critical malnourishment. Controversies. Throughout its history, the school was faced with numerous allegations of student maltreatment. In 2001, Details magazine cited Elan as among the most controversial of the nation's residential therapeutic communities. In 1975, Illinois state officials removed 11 children from the Elan program, alleging mistreatment. In the late 1970s, Androscoggin County Sheriff's Office Max Ashburn visited the school after repeatedly hearing rumors of abuse, but the staff did not allow him to entry into the school past the lobby. Following this, he began keeping a file in which he had documented names, phone numbers, everything that was related to the Elan School, and he also reported the abuses. In 2002, during the trial of Michael Skakel, an Elan alumnus, witnesses testified that beating and public humiliation were parts of life at Elan during the late 1970s. In trial testimony, former students also described the practice of placing a student in a boxing ring, surrounded by classmates who confronted the student. The New York State Education Department, which has paid tuition for special education students to attend Elan School, gave the school a favorable review in 2005. In 2007, however, New York educational officials raised questions about the school's practices, alleging in a letter to the school and Maine education officials that Elan students were physically restraining their peers and being deprived of sleep. The allegations prompted the state of New York to threaten to withdraw tuition money for taxpayer-funded students. The school's lawyer contested the allegations. In March 2016, Maine State Police announced they had opened a cold case investigation into the death of former Elan resident Phil Williams, who died in December 27, 1982. After participating in Elan's Ring, where students were forced to fight one another as a means of behavior modification. The state police later announced no charges would be filed as a result of their investigation, citing insufficient evidence. So there were no cameras. Students would occasionally run away from Elan. Former County Sheriff's Officer Captain Ray LaFrance stated that Elan would send groups in vans to search for returned runaways, and noted that the school only called police to report missing students as a last resort. LaFrance said some runaways would be relieved to be found after spending nights in the woods, though others were scared to death to go back. Though others were scared to death to go back to Elan. If we really felt they were really scared, we'd bring them into the department, call their parents, and at least let them know what's going on. Then we'd call Elan and they'd come pick them up. In 1979, Lieutenant Ashburn was called by a local family to pick up at 16-year-old Elan runaway. The boy had been a student at Elan for several months and said that his parents lived in another state. Ashburn recalled in 2016 that the boy was crying and he was begging me to take him back. Rather than return him to the school, Ashburn, a former truck driver, took the boy to a local diner and instructed him to hitch a ride with one of the truck drivers there. In July 1990, 15-year-old runaway Brad Glickman of Bedford, New York, visited the home of Todd and Aubrey Blaylock in Norway, Maine. After meeting one of Audrey Blaylock's daughters, Glickman told those he met that his name was David Smith. Roy O'Hara, a resident at the house, was handling a revolver when a discharge, fatally shooting Glickman in the head. O'Hara was found guilty of manslaughter that summer. On March 21, 1993, 17-year-old student Dawn Marie Birnbaum ran away from the Elan School during a school outing. On March 24th, she was found dead in a snowbank near Interstate 80. 36-year-old James Robert Cruz Jr. was charged with the first-degree murder of Birnbaum and sentenced to life in prison. In closing, on March 23, 2011, Elan School announced it would be closing April 1, 2011, with the avowed purpose of forcing the school to close. She added that the school has unfortunately been unable to survive the damage. Unquote. This is blowing my mind, you all. I cannot even imagine a school or a facility operating this way is actually real. I can only imagine how the families feel of the victim. They lost their babies. These kids, how mindfucked they were. You know, they're going to this school. You know, they already don't want to be there. Their parents are sending them there, or they're, you know, sent there, you know, as a government order, as a court order to reform their lives, and they're subjected to abuse and not eating and not having any type of self-enjoyment. Life as they knew it is completely gone. It's just mind-boggling. I can't imagine this. This is insane. This is crazy, y'all. This is crazy.
Through the late 70s and into the early 80s, reports of the true nature of Elan began to spread by word of mouth from former students. Authorities in Maine reportedly visited the school upwards of 12 times to investigate, however returned with absolutely nothing to show for it. Frustratingly, the operation that Joe Ritchie was running was completely and entirely legal. There were no laws in place for facilities like this, so it was allowed to remain in operation without issue.
You'd either be in jail, in a hospital, or dead, okay? You know, it's time to take your life seriously. Get your feelings off. You're a worthless piece of shit! You're nobody to me! I'll fucking slay you! You boring motherfucker! You lazy piece of shit! I'll kill your fucking limo and beat you fucking with it! Piece of shit asshole! I'll fucking kill you! I don't give a fuck who you are! You're nobody! You're stuck here for God! And I'll make sure of that!
I came across another article that I want to get into with you guys, okay? The controversial story of the Elan School, the last stop for troubled teens in Maine. According to the allthat'sinteresting.com article, first opened in 1970 and shut down in 2011, the Elan School was the last resort for parents of teens with behavioral problems and allegedly a site of systematic abuse. For some, the idyllic woods of Poland, Maine led to hell. There, the infamous Elan School promised to rehabilitate troubled teens. But many of us alumni claim that the school's method amounted to abuse. Remembering the school as a hellhole, quote unquote, they say that the school administrators humiliated, restrained, and isolated students. Teenagers couldn't talk too loudly, smile at the wrong time, or even think about running away. While some former students maintain that the school's harsh tactics saved their lives, others contend that the Elan School left them with deep trauma that remains to this day, years after the school closed down. Before focusing on troubled teens, the Elan School sought to save drug addicts. Founded in 1970 by Dr. Gerald Davison, a psychiatrist, and Joe Rickey, a former heroin addict, who had experiencing work in drug treatment facilities. The Elan School eventually zeroed in on adolescents. Ricky envisioned the school as a last resort for parents whose children struggle with behavior and psychological problems. These are not your typical public schools, Ricky explained. Their parents bring them here to succeed when everything else has failed. Ricky employed harsh methods to reform the students under his care. Using what he learned at other facilities, Ricky forced teenagers to scream at each other, wear humiliating signs, and even physically fight. He said it was in the name of rehabilitation, but many alumni disagree. For decades, students in grades 8 through 12 pass through Elan School. They generally fall into two camps: those who saw their education as abuse and those who saw it as necessary reform. There are people who will swear on a stack of Bibles that Joe Ricky saved their lives, said Ed Staffen, who graduated from Elan in 1978. There are others who will swear that Joe Ricky was the devil. Matt Hoffman, who attended the school from 1974 to 1976, called it a sadistic, brutal, violent, soul-eating hellhole, quote unquote. He and others recall tactics that included restraints, humiliation, and corporal punishment. Students were reportedly forbidden from taking a shower longer than 3 minutes, being in the bathroom for too long, writing without permission, looking out the window, or simply rubbing staff members the wrong way. If students broke any of these rules, they were often screamed at by their classmates for about an hour in a punishment called a general meeting, quote unquote, forced to wear humiliating signs or costumes, or even coerced into fighting other students in the ring, they called it, a makeshift circle of their peers. According to some accounts, these forced boxing matches resulted in at least one student death. When 15-year-old Phil Williams Jr. died at the school in 1982, his family was told that the cause was a brain aneurysm. But over 30 years later, allegations surfaced that he'd actually been beaten to death in the ring after he complained of a headache. But school administrators long dismissed accusations from students. Responding to reports of trauma at Elan, a school lawyer said, "People who fought in wars have nightmares too. Some wars are worth fighting," quote unquote. Despite the allegations, parents continue to pay upwards of $50,000 to send their kids to the Elan School for years. It took a murder trial and an online campaign to finally close the school's doors for good. Though Elan's harsh tactics were not a secret, the school got an unwanted boost of publicity when one of its former students was put on trial for murder in 2002. Michael C. Skakel, a Kennedy relative, was suspected of killing his neighbor, Martha Moxley, in 1975 when they were both 15, just a couple of years before Skakel was sent to the Elan School. While at the school, Skakel allegedly confessed to murdering Moxley. One former classmate even testified in pre-trial hearing that Skakel told him, "I'm going to get away with murder. I am Kennedy," quote unquote. But as Skakel tells it, the other students and faculty had tortured him to get him to confess. When those students testified during his trial, they broadcasted what had suffered at Elan to a wide audience. As for Joe Ricky, he said that Skakel, I think it's Skakel, y'all, had never confessed to the murder, but Ricky never testified because he died of lung cancer before he was able to. Skakel was initially found guilty of the murder in 2002 and sentenced to 20 years to life for the crime. though he later be released in 2013 when a judge ruled that his lawyer had not given him efficient representation. Since then, the conviction had been reinstated, vacated, and reviewed multiple times. In 2020, Skakel ultimately walked free after prosecutors said that they didn't have enough evidence to retry him. The decision remains controversial. Yet it took an anonymous internet user, and not Kennedy's scandal, to bring Elan down, according to Ricky's widow, Sharon Terry, who took over the school after his death. Bad press online led to low enrollment, specifically to a Reddit user. Terry pointed specifically to a Reddit user named Gazaz My Hero, who had led an online campaign against Elan. The user claimed to have attended the school in 1998 and alleged that the school's punishments were overly severe for most of its students, who committed only minor infractions. I believe that the internet is our #1 tool for exposing these horrid blind spots for what they are, quote unquote. Gazaz My Hero wrote. "Land saved my life," said Sarah Levesque, who attended the school in the 1990s, "but I feel haunted by it," quote unquote. This will conclude our video today. Unfortunately, the Elan School is one of many stage cults. My precious, sweet condolences to the families that have lost their children due to the violent acts at this school cover-up cult, I don't know what you want to call it. Imagine sending your child to a reform school in hopes of positive change, and instead get a call saying that they've passed away. I can only imagine the gut-wrenching pain they felt. I can only imagine. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.